Okay, so I've got the model into Revit that I'm going to use really as a reference. I'm not going to have this model showing probably in the finished design that I'm going to work on, but I definitely want it as a reference. So I've got it there in the middle of the space, and what I'm going to use now is mass modelling, partly just to show you this different approach to modelling that you have in Revit, and also because in this case it's going to be, I think, a really effective way of generating the sorts of forms I'm after. So on the Massing and Site tab, you have all the massing tools. And if I go to In Place Mass, it's going to bring up a message about showing the mass. Just leave that and click Close. And then I'm going to give the name for the mass, and I'm going to call this main shell. Oops. Mail. So main, if I can type, shell. And then you can see it gives you these tools which are quite different to what you get with the regular modelling tools with other families. So at first it'll seem a bit simpler, but with this modelling tool set you can actually do a lot more than you can with the regular modelling tools. So I'm just going to do an outline of the space I want, and maybe then you'll see some techniques that you can't do with normal modelling. So I'm just going to use the line tool. And so here, this is just like drawing your shapes for extrusions and other things like that. But this is more of a 3D interface. So when you're drawing lines, you'll see then next to that group of shapes, there are options to either draw on the face or draw on the work plane. Okay, so if you leave it on draw on face, in this case, I've got a really complex model there, and I could potentially draw on any of those surfaces. And I don't want to do that. I want to draw on the work plane that's already set up for the ground floor. And that's usually the simplest option, just like drawing normally. And then you can see I can still snap to these edges, but it's going to project them onto the ground floor plane. And that's what I want. So I'm going to snap now, just clicking along the edges, keeping it nice and simple, and not trying to overcomplicate it. Now you could draw curves if you want to, but like anything, if you make it more complicated when it doesn't need to be, then it's going to be more work than it needs to be, and often harder to turn that into a a nice resolved design as well. So again, just trying to get fairly simple geometry, so you can see again what you can do with massing. So I'm not going to trace this exactly, just trying to get the basic form. Like I said, it could be done with arcs if I wanted a curve there, but I'm going to just use straight lines where possible because they're easier to work with. Okay, tab where necessary to snap to different things is a good option. Okay, so I've nearly done one wing, and that's really what I'm after. I'm just trying to get one side of this shuttle for one side of my space, and I don't want it to be obvious. So in plan, you'd read this, but if you were in the space, you wouldn't hopefully pick that up. There's a bit of a debate actually with a lot of architects at the moment whether this sort of mapping is a good way of coming up with designs. I think it could still be interesting, but not everyone thinks so. But yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So there we go. So I've got that basic shape, and I'm going to just finish that off and get some sort of outline here. There we go. So that's now a shell, or say a closed shape, and I'm going to go to a 3D view, and I'm going to duplicate my 3D view. First, I'll just need to finish my mass because I can't duplicate the view while I'm working in the mass, so I can just finish it, duplicate the view by right-clicking and choosing duplicate. I'm going to rename my view and call it 3D No Shuttle select my shuttle model and hide it. And now I can just see the shape. So I'm going to select that now, edit in place, select the shape again, and then use create form. So that turns it into 3D. Yeah, it's basically an extrusion, but then if you think about what you've been doing with 3ds Max, I can select any of these points, and here in fact I've probably got a little bit too much detail, so I'm going to go back, and so I'm just going to undo and maybe refine that shape a little bit. So when you draw a shape with massing, it's a little bit different to an extrusion. The shape's automatically connected. So to edit individual pieces, you just need to select the whole shape and then click again on the one you want to edit. So I can delete that. I'm just going to delete a few and just refine this shape a little bit so that it's got maybe a little bit less detail. So just taking out every second line. Okay, so that's a fairly simple thing. There we go. Shouldn't be too complicated for most of you. And so maybe over here as well, I can lose some of that detail. Okay, so then I can reconnect those just by clicking and dragging on the grips, making sure I snap each time onto the endpoint. Now I'm doing this in 3D, but you could do this equally in plan view. That's alright, and there, just drag this, and so notice how it's reconnecting them. As I select it now, those others are connected, so it's a bit smarter in a way than the regular solid modelling. It knows usually when to connect things. Sometimes it's not so clever, but usually it's pretty good. And so there, just got a couple more to connect. And a really good tip I can give you, when you're using solid mass modelling, it'll help you a lot if you get the base shape pretty close to what you want it to be in the end, rather than trying to modify it too much after you've extruded it. You can modify it, but because you have a lot more options, it can be a bit more difficult. Okay, so I've just modified my shape. Now I'm going to go back to create form. You can see that's a bit simpler. And so the idea I had here is that I want to have a sloping shape, and so I can select some of these edges. So just by clicking there, so I just need to deselect first, and then now I can select that edge. And notice how you get a gizmo that's probably might remind you of what you have in 3ds Max. Now this is something you just can't do with the regular modelling tools in Revit. So I can drag that. Okay. Yeah, and if I press space, it's going to toggle between the orange arrows, which follow the angle of that surface, and then your red, green, blue arrows, which are X, Y, and Z. So if I drag on the red arrow there, it's moving in the X direction. Using the blue arrow. Yep. So I don't want that because I want to keep the top fairly flat, but yeah, you can do that. So then here I can bring some of these other surfaces in and see what happens there. You can also grab individual vertices. So just by clicking on the corner, I can bring those in. So I can get a more irregular surface. And so you could do this with a blend in Revit as well, but you couldn't have the height changing. So once you start changing the height, you can see then how much more interesting the results can be than what you get with the normal modelling tools. Yeah, well, no, it's because it's a massing model. So using the mass modelling tools, you get options that you don't have with the other modelling options in Revit. So here, once I start putting in these different Z values, I'm going to get sort of interesting things happening on the top there. and can experiment with those. Maybe this corner might need to come down. Okay, so it's important though that you realise this isn't meant to be a finished surface. So actually I'll skip that one and go to this one. This is a conceptual model. And then I'll finish that, and you have on the Massing and Site tab this button here which hides and unhides the mass. Now it's not doing it. Why isn't it doing it? Let's just go to a different view and see what happens. Okay, there's something going along there. I might have changed my view settings, so let's just go into the visibility graphics overrides, go to edit there, and then, yeah, I must have turned massing on in the template. So this button, that would normally be off. And then, let's see, that's better. Okay, so that toggle there toggles the massing on and off because it's not meant as a physical object. Now in this view, it won't toggle it on and off because, again, in my graphics mode here, mass is turned on. So if mass is ticked, then the massing will stay on always. But if it's not ticked, so I'll just make another 3D view. And there, you can see massing does toggle on and off. So to turn that into walls, now I can go to the wall tool, and then you can see it's on wall by face. Just going to leave it with a simple wall, generic 200mm, and I can pick any of these surfaces. I'm going to change the location line to finish face interior. And you can see then I can turn them into walls. So that's projecting out. If I go to finish face exterior, it'll go the other way. Okay, it doesn't want to join them, but they're still going to work. And I can turn all of those surfaces that I want into walls. So back to the wall tool again. Like I said, if you try to push it too far, sometimes it does have issues. That one's okay. So again here it doesn't want to join those walls, but at least it's got walls there. And so these would show in your plan view and work as real walls rather than just giving you a solid form. So yep, sure. So if I go into ground floor plan, and then I can toggle the massing off, and then you can just see the walls. And I might hide that as well. So you can keep toggling the massing back on, and then turn it off when you're done with it. And so you may want it just to have more generic forms or more basic forms, especially when you're getting used to it. So if I go back and do a new mass, and I'm going to call this central form. And instead of starting with a complex shape like that, I'll just start with a rectangle. Again, just checking that it's got draw on work plane and that I'm drawing on the ground floor. So that way I can just draw a rectangle going through the middle there. And then again, I'm going to select this face. I'll select that shape, create form, and it's obviously a box. Now I can select the top surface. I want to stretch that. I can select again an individual edge, and if it doesn't let you click on it, you can always use tab to cycle to the different options. So I can change the height of this if I want that maybe to be sloping. I might want it to be tapering at one end, so I can bring these vertices in. So again, this is something you just cannot do with regular solid geometry. So I've got basic maybe form there that I might be after, and maybe I want it to taper in at the bottom here. So that's already something fairly interesting, which again, if you keep it simple, usually it's easier to manage as well. Again, something that you just would struggle to do with massing, so with regular modelling, because even if you try to use a blend, you can't blend two shapes that aren't parallel. Yeah. Right, so the only way to do this is with massing. And you see there are a lot of tools in Revit that are set up to be dependent on massing. So if I finish this mass, now you can see then I'll go into an elevation so that I can see the shape. So I had it there. So there's the shape I've just done. So I've got some levels. Right, so I'm going to just extend them so they're big enough for the building, and then go back to draw some more levels using the same sorts of heights. Oh, that's enough. Okay, so back to my 3D view, and I can select my new mass, go to mass floors, and I'm just going to tick those levels. So that'll give me floor plates based on that geometry. Now I can go to the wall tool, and using the same wall type, I'm going to change it to finish face exterior, and this time just use pick faces, which is the same as what I was seeing before. And I can choose, maybe we'll have the back solid and the side on the left and the right solid. And then I'm going to go to the Massing and Site tab, and this time use Curtain System for the front. Create System. That'll turn into a curtain wall. So curtain systems need to have something like a mass to generate that that form, or to generate the curtain system. And then, so then I can use the roof tool and pick the top surface, create roof, and then you've got a couple of options there. You can either attach the walls to the roof, or you can just bring it up. So there, I'll just bring it up by 400 so that it sits on top. And then finally, actually, I better put some floors in, so I can go and just pick these surfaces. Now, the walls are getting in the way and making it hard for me to pick those, so I'm just going to hide one of those using the temporary hide option down the bottom. So I can see my floor plates again, and then I'll just use the floor tool and pick my floor plates. Right, floor. Okay, so later on you can refine those. At the moment they're going through the walls, but you can easily refine those. They've got the same options when you select them to go to edit boundary and bring it in later on. But for now I'm just going to reset that and then toggle my mass off. So at the moment you'll see if I go to a realistic view or a shaded view, it's a bit unclear because the massing is still sitting there. But if I toggle the mass off now, then I'm left just with the physical elements. You can see then how you can create all this interesting geometry. So you don't need to use all of the massing. That's where people get confused and think they're making the building, when really you might just use it for a few surfaces. And you can abstract things or generate forms in different ways using that tool. So I might hide this as well. Whoops. Sorry, hide the thing I want. There we go. Right, so hopefully that'll give you some ideas how you can get started anyway. Massing is a really useful way of just doing block modelling, even if you're not using all the things it can do. So what we've been doing in some of my other classes is using it just for so for master planning really. And so I'll just quickly show you for what we've done in some of the other projects. So I'm going to save it somewhere else. Here it is. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so you can have, there's that sort of block planning to help you do your spatial planning, and then combine that with things like area plans. So that's using the area plan tools in Revit, and they're fairly simple tools. you don't need to do really fancy geometry, but you can still plan things out in an interesting way before you get the walls and the doors and all those physical things that will put in too much detail when you're just trying to plan out the overall layout and get the concept working. So massing's really good for that, and I'll just show you one more. It is very similar tools to SketchUp, that's right. And I think that's actually where SketchUp's good. I really like SketchUp when it's used for that sort of fairly basic modelling. Where I think SketchUp falls over completely is when you're trying to model complex forms that it can do, but then it just becomes really hard to navigate apart from anything else. So, sorry, here we go, version 4, that'll do. So this is a bit of a larger one, and so you can do, so here I'm starting to do some of this shading, but like sun shading using massing, but using just the mass also, that shouldn't be there. So I'll fix that. Okay, so you can plan out the levels and then if you're doing any interesting geometry as well, do that all with the massing and just get the overall form of the building, even if it's just done with boxes mostly, before you go too far with the complicated things that people think you need massing for, where really, even though massing can do complex geometry, it's definitely not always necessary. And only do that if you have to, but if you have to, you can do a lot of things that you can't with the regular tools. So anyhow, just thought I'd show you that. And it's one of those things Autodesk have been developing for a while. So if any of you heard of Project Vasari, that was a free modelling package that Autodesk developed mostly for students. That was very similar to SketchUp, but they've changed it now, and it's called something else. It's I'll just quickly show you. It's kind of being replaced by two things. You've got Format. So Autodesk Format it's amazing. It's almost a rip-off of SketchUp, I think. But it plugs into Revit. That's the brilliant thing about it. It works as a plug-in to Revit. So Primer. So that's just that's just the website. So that's the sort of modelling you can do there. Very similar to massing. The tools actually came from the massing tools in Vasari, as far as I know, and it works with tablets as well. So you've got this whole new interface for modelling that they're developing. Still in developmental stage. Massing's been there for a while in Revit, but there's, I think, a lot of big changes to come in the next year or two. And then the other one's Dynamo. Yeah, and so the other side of massing is assemblies, and this is a little bit more advanced, but basically you can do parametric modelling. In other words, modelling using numbers, using parametric values. So it's very similar to a lot of the plugins in Rhino and 3ds Max and Maya and other programs like that. So you can see there, that is one model that has lots of different iterations or variations based on parameters. So we'll go further with that with families as well. You can do a lot of this in families in Revit, but you can take it much further using this massing interface, or this new interface. Not really just massing, it's a whole new workflow that they're developing at Autodesk, which like I said, it's kind of in the early stages, even though it's been they've been toying with it for years with Vasari. Vasari's been retired now, and it's been replaced by these two things, Format and Dynamo. But if you want to learn it or get used to it, try massing. It's a really good approach to modelling, I think. And you might come up with some forms and ideas that you can really experiment and test before you have to get the walls and the doors and the other physical things that you build at the end.